When I tell people what I do, what I used to say is I do the posters. And there was a time when I started when literally it was about posters. And people collect posters and they love posters, and you took an ad in the New York Times and you were done. Whereas in the last 20 years, as we've worked on this, it's really building a brand, building a campaign. You know, we make the posters, we do the television, we do the radio, we do the online, we do the outdoor, we do the social. Now when people ask me, I tell them, I work on Broadway, I try and come up with a big idea. There's a thing I like to do called the emotional promise, which is when you make a thing, it's making an emotional promise with the person who's going to buy a ticket. The advertising should be clear what it's promising you, how the evening will be. Funny, sad, sexy, thrilling, short, long, filled with stars, not filled with stars, original. Like, that's my job. I had a design studio for 10 years doing entertainment. First, records, cable TV, Swatch, you know, the $35 watches. I was their creative director for a while. And then through them, I did some MTV, and that was when cable blew up, and Comedy Central, like I launched The Daily Show and stuff like that. And then the last thing that happened before Broadway, which got me to Broadway, was records. Sony, and then Geffen. And I had just done an Aerosmith album cover for them, and I had done Lisa Loeb. Remember Lisa Loeb and Stay and that cat face? That was me. David Geffen became an investor in Rent, and he said, I really want to sell this in the front of the record stores where the rock and roll bins are, not in the back of the stores, when we had record stores where the Broadway section was. So Geffen sent me to see the show, and so that's how it started. I was only supposed to design the album, and I had a very strong reaction to seeing the show, besides the fact the show was amazing. I wrote Kevin and Jeffrey. They were going to go really rock and roll. They were going to do this very grungy, kind of very cool campaign. But I said to them, I get it, because you don't do rock and roll. This is the rock and roll show, and that seems right. But the truth of the matter is, that's not the audience you need. You need people who used to go to Broadway, or maybe their parents took them, their parents went, and now they don't really go. I just said, I feel like a lot of these materials aren't geared to me. But emotionally, they seemed like sort of, you know, my parents' Oldsmobile. So I said, I really think it's a musical, and we should keep it a musical and not go too crazy rock and roll, funky, grungy. But I think that we can make something that really has this dynamic richness. It was a photographer named Amy Gwip that I worked with at Rolling Stone, and we had this idea of shooting them all. Other people said to me, why are you taking their picture? They're not famous, they're totally unknown, why would you show their faces? And I was like, no, it's not about that they're famous, it's that all the energy from the show is in them. And if you show them the right way, they'll bring the energy forward. And they honestly, they all just were how they were. I didn't get them to do anything. We did it all in a day. They were sweet, they were fun, they were shell-shocked from Jonathan's passing. But the hardest thing on that show was Jonathan's family saying, you've got to do right by our son. That was hard and kind of really encouraging to kind of get it right. One of the things I love to do besides the emotional promise is I love to figure out where there might be problems and solve them from the beginning. Now in Chicago, you know, it came out of encores, and Cindy Adams wrote a column that said, who's going to pay $75, which was top ticket price at the time, and who's going to pay that for this glorified concert, which is actually true of the staging. You know, the bandstand is there. And I said, okay, to everybody in my team, minimalism. This needs to look like if we had the world's biggest budget, we would do it exactly this way, because that's true. And finally I said, okay, Calvin Klein, black and white fashion images, when you see those, nobody thinks, I guess they didn't want to spend the budget to be in full color. It's very obvious that the world that they're in, of that kind of minimalism, is an aesthetic choice. And then the last one was the sexiness, that the show was so much sexier than it had been before with that minimalism, and I wanted to show that. And we decided that as long as the women were empowered and were never handcuffed or chained or in a jail, then they were in charge and they could be as sexy as they wanted to be. And those were the rules. The rules from the beginning were black, white, and red, and no jail cells ever. And I'm still sort of the police on that, and because it gets done all over the world. You know, once a week somebody does a version with the girls behind bars, and it totally changes it, because then they're not in charge, and then their sexuality, they're not empowered enough to be in their own place. I do this thing on shows, which is called the event. If I say to you, what should I see? And you tell me, then what you say is the event. And it's not the log line, and it's not the elevator speech, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be like Hugh Jackman's in it, and you're like, right, okay, I'm going. Or it can be like they've added a circus to Pippin, and you're like, oh, that could be interesting. It can be very simple. In the end, all tickets are sold through word of mouth, and what we do is give people the right words. On Hamilton, the idea became, all right, how do we not get in the way of this? How do we make this, there was a version where you knew we could make this cool downtown art, and it was already downtown at the Public, and we could really bring the hip hop to the history and get all top dog, underdog with it. And then I realized, well, that's the least that could happen because it's already gonna do that. It doesn't need me. We wanted something really dynamic, and we wanted something really simple, and we wanted something that was classic, literally like the Cat's Eyes. And then we decided that the gold was obvious because it was right for hip hop, and it was right for the Revolutionary War. And so that was beautiful if both things were right. And then the silhouette seemed really a cool idea because we actually wanted to have this classic appeal that anybody, and not actually give too much of an emotional promise, but to just sort of feel the confidence of its strength. And one of the reasons to do the book was there were so many posters that were just honestly digital bits that really just sat in the computer, and there was, they were never going to get seen. And so we started to pull them out and find them and go, oh, remember this? I can't believe that. And try and find things because some things were sort of disappearing. So there's a ton of things in the book. The easiest one that comes to mind is Seussical. That Seussical is a show that it gets done all over the country, all over the world now, but at the time we thought it was going to be the next Hamilton. It sort of speaks to the alchemy of the magic because it sort of could be, it's just something didn't quite go. And I loved that ad campaign. David LaChapelle shot it, and we had all these amazing pictures, this huge production. We shut down a block in Newark, and we had like foam bubbles in bathtubs and crazy props, and Kevin Chamberlain sitting on this ladder, 15 feet off the ground with the Horton thing. I just love all that. So I just blew up all those posters, in the book, and because I just love them. When I used to do even the record covers and the film stuff and all that stuff, it's amazing how fast the stuff would go away. And the Broadway stuff is like part of culture. It's amazing in New York how the Broadway stuff becomes about a time and a place, and you can look back on it and see a photograph, particularly of Times Square. There's always some photograph of Times Square. And every time, I think it's amazing, except for if I see something and I can't read it well enough, and then I literally want to step in front of a moving car. Because it's out there and it's got to work while it moves, and no matter how much you want it to be simple and strong, when you put it in Times Square, there's a lot to look at, and it's sort of never bold enough, and it's never big enough, but we do what we can.